So now officially, good morning to everyone. My name is Jillian Ayala, and I'm delighted to welcome you all in this third annual conference, Think Tank Central Conference. Advancing Freedom is the name this year. And it's also my honor to say welcome to Madrid. Just the first things you need to know that you have free Wi-Fi, so you can connect to TTCCEU, TTCCEU, and the password for the Wi-Fi is CEFAS, CEFAS hashtag 23. You also have all the information in the front desk with all the name of the Wi-Fi and the password printed, so you can ask anyone if you want the free Wi-Fi. And after the last 2 years, we want to do things differently today. Instead of going to long panels, we want a more democratic format. You are going to be attending to roundtables when everyone can participate. You can speak freely, you can ask all the questions that you want, and that's the idea this year. So everyone can raise their hand, speak, ask, or whatever they want. Of course, we need to be strict on time management, so that's why we will have the first 5 minutes of each roundtables to the opening statements, then everyone can speak, we are open to the debate, and then the conclusions. That's the format that we are going for this year. Also, you will have all the information that you might need, other details that you might want to know on the website, newdirection.online. And of course, the first thing that we want to know is introduce you to this third year annual conference. And to do that, we have 3 people who I'm delighted to present this morning. So first, let's welcome Tomasz Pareba, member of the European Parliament from Poland, the president of New Direction Foundation for European Reform. Also, Barbara Kolm, the president of the Austrian Economic Center based in Vienna, co-partner this year in the Think Tank Central Conference, and Elio Gallego, director of CEFAS, director de CEFAS, our host here in Madrid, and also co-partner this year in the third annual conference. So the stage and the audience is yours.
Maybe I will start. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, friends, as a president of New Direction, it gives me an enormous pleasure to speak before you today as we launch our third annual Think Tank Central Conference here in Madrid. As in previous years, our aim is to create an environment in which, as the leading center-right think tanks in Europe, we can talk together, speak together, discuss together, and build our future based on intellectual discussion, academic discussion, which will be absolutely followed afterwards by the documents like reports, analysis, which will be absolutely afterwards distributed in the different institutions of the European Union. It's a privilege for us at New Direction to be able to hold this event for the 3rd year in a row, this time representing even more institutions because our formula is extending year by year. Today we are hosting also think tanks from USA, Brazil, and South Africa. Welcome all of you here in Madrid. We together represent all schools of thoughts from within the freedom of movement, libertarians, classical liberals, Christian Democrats, moderate conservatives, national conservatives, and traditionalists. Some of us represent think tanks that focus on single issues such as economics, education, or foreign policies. Others come from institutions that touch every subject imaginably. We are gathering together to share this expertise and our experiences and build our networks in order to create our movement based on our values and promote our values in the different places of the world. But this year is absolutely crucial. This year is absolutely very important because freedom in Europe, I think it's the sharing feeling between all of us has been more threatened than it's today, both from inside and from outside. The international threats of the combined forces of Russia, China, Iran are working to destabilize the world order we have built for ourselves together over the past century. Whilst at home, the radical left is harming our traditional institutions and attempting to set us on dangerous new course. This is the reason why we are meeting here. This is the reason why we need to discuss, we need to think about how to stop this bad scenario, not only in the European institutions, but also in the different places in the world and different countries of the world. Because our role, our aim, our challenge should be to find a solution which would allow us to build a secure world and come back to the values which are threatened, as I said before. During the Cold War, with the visionary leaders like Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, and John Paul II, we fought back against the advance of communism and won. Now, faced with similar threats, we must rediscover those values that we know are the right ones. It is, however, a matter of making sure that they are heard. It is the reason, very important reason, that the next European elections in June will be the most important to take place, as they present a historical choice between the return to common sense, conservative and classical liberal thinking, or move towards chaos with the Social Democrats, Greens and Communists, who will drive Europe over the age. The aim of Think Tank Central, this is the most important thing I would like to strongly underline today, has always been to act as a space for dialogue. The aim of the next 2 days is to connect the leading pro-freedom center-right movement, think tanks and organizations, that we can start working together on these areas where we have a common interest, whatever that is education, economic, culture, or foreign policy. I hope that, I'm definitely sure, that you will be able to use the next few days as a chance to build bridges, not just across Europe, but across the world, and to create a network that can offer a positive vision for the future based on the values of which are sharing very strongly, like individual responsibility, strong national states, and the competitive economy. Unfortunately, I will not be able to stay 2 days in Madrid because of national elections in my country, in Poland. I need to come back today, but having opportunity to speak in front of you, I would like to thank you very much. Thank you very much for co-organizers of this conference, to Barbara Kolm, the president of Austrian Economic Center, and also the Foundation Disenso, and also the Cephas Foundation hosting us today in Madrid. I'm very appreciate for your openness, very appreciate for your help, very appreciate for your invitation, and I'm definitely sure that together we'll be able to create a strong movement, based on conservative values, conservative ideas, which would influence afterwards in the next years in the different part of the world, including European institutions. I'm honored to represent European Parliament as a member of the European Parliament. I know that a lot of things inside the European Union should be changed. A lot of drives should be changed, a lot of issues should be modified, and I'm definitely sure that there is a good environment, there is good mood inside the European Union countries. A lot of countries like Poland, Spain, Italy, Czech Republic, Hungary is able to create governments based on the conservative values. This is the time next year in the European elections to extend our presence in the European Parliament. Our group, ECR group, is the fifth group in the European Parliament now, but I hope that in the next year, after the elections, taking into account this positive pro-conservative moods inside Europe, will be at least third group in the European Parliament, and with the cooperation with New Direction, with other think tanks, will be able to change Europe and will be able to seriously talk about something what is absolutely threatened today. I mean about freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of presence, freedom of thoughts. These values are threatened, significantly threatened today. Believe me, being the member of European Parliament, I follow a lot of debates. I have a lot of examples when these values are absolutely, trying to be putting into the corner. But our determination, our challenge is to change it as soon as possible. So thank you very much again for hosting us today. Thank you very much for your presence. I wish you fruitful, constructive debate, and looking forward to the effects of this conference. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure and privilege to be here in Madrid again and to be part of what we have tried to build more than 20 years ago in Europe, a movement of think tanks, of academics, of politicians who all share the same values and have one common goal: freedom and economic growth and prosperity for each and every one of us in Europe. And I think we have come a long way. And before talking a little bit about this long way, I want to especially thank our President of New Direction and Member of European Parliament, Tomasz Poreba, for taking this initiative and starting a third, I would also say a third way of communicating between those think tanks, the academics, and the politicians, because after all, our competitors, I would not say enemies, but our competitors from the left and the green side are collaborating in a different way, are using resources in a different way, have access to resources, not only financial resources, but also human resources that are totally different. After all, what we defend is freedom. Many people take this for granted. It is not. And we only realize, and the Ukrainian example shows best, we only realize that is not a given, and that we need to constantly defend it every single day. And this is why I also want to thank the president and director of CEFAS here in Madrid, Elio Galero, for hosting us here, because after all, universities are the place where the next generation, and hopefully not the last generation, is being educated, and where they get a glimpse and an idea of what our ideas and values are about. So having said that, I would say that the third edition of Think Tank Central is a truly innovative idea. And to tell you the truth, when 20 years ago, Krasus Stanchev, who is here in the room, and Pierre Garello and friends from the Naumann Foundation back then, friends from Atlas and Heritage in the US joined us, and we were sitting together and say, we Europeans kind of need to find something where we can meet and get together from our side of the center-right front. We were thinking, well, let's create the new resource bank in Europe, which we did. It took us 3 years to get it started. The first edition was hosted by Krasen in Sofia, actually in Borovets, and I think it's very memorable for everybody of us. Krasen will definitely share ideas. Thank you for doing that. Thanks a lot, Krasen. And we have come a long way. But this European Resource Bank was in a different format. We tried to do a little bit of upfront education. We tried to build our network. We ran the Dragon's Den and many other things. But we never did something what was this for the first time. And I have to thank the entire New Direction team, especially Witold and also Robert, to kind of challenge us to say, okay, now let's sit together and kind of do this as sparring partners. Pick the ideas, the best ideas of everybody, and bring it to a big output, to a big paper that will hopefully be presented at the end of this conference. Would be too short-sighted, but for next year's election circus that we see in Europe, and also for the European elections, where we need to put our ideas up on the front. So this Think Tank Central is definitely in partnership with all the think tanks and all the academics, and I have to thank each and every speaker who has made the way here to Madrid and who contributes his and her time to help us build a better Europe. The economic challenges are tremendous, huge. If we have a European central banker saying inflation is transitory, we simply have to ask which books did they look into when they were talking about that? Definitely not the wisdom of the Austrian school or of many other libertarian classical ideas. And of course, many institutions, and this is what I may criticize now, is that they don't stick to their mandates. It's not the mandate of a central bank to think green and to look into these policies. It is the mandate to make sure that financial stability is there and that monetary stability is in place. But then you may even ask academically or even in practice, is this something that we really want, organized in this centrally planned way? So these are the challenges that we will today discuss together and make sure that we can translate those outcomes into a way that the last generation at least joins us in a debate and joins us in a discussion. Because after all, this is what we will see in the outcome of next year's elections in Europe. And there is an opportunity right now where center-right groups can at least make a big change. And where we can, and I would like to quote Hayek here, get rid of the centrally planned economy that we these days see out of Brussels. We need to look at the subsidiarity principle, at our values, those ideas that the founding fathers back then after World War II had in mind when we tried to build a free Europe that was on the basis of four European freedoms, which is, and free enterprise, free markets, free individuals and free people. And this is something that we need to foster, and the common denominator, and let me close with that, is economic growth, well-being, and freedom for everybody. And that is what we need to support, that we need to translate for the masses, and even the journalists. Those journalists who are here, thank you for joining us, are the ones who understand those principles. But there is many out there in the clouds of Twitter or X or anywhere who don't even have an interest in that. And it's our task, not only for you as politicians, and not for you as academics here in this room, but also for us as think tanks, to translate this to reality and make those changes. Without further ado, I would like to hand over, and thank you all for coming.
Good morning. It is a pleasure to welcome you to Madrid, Spain, and to this conference Advancing Freedom organized by New Directions. CEFAS and São Paulo CEU University are very honored to host you today to talk about the very important subject, freedom, one idea that is threatened nowadays. However, what is not under threat at this moment? Certainly, the sovereignty and the independence of nations is being threatened. Also, human dignity is threatened by genetic experiments. And the wizard apprentices play with the human lives, not to mention abortion, euthanasia. The same happens to me when it comes to social institutions that have made Western civilization the most fruitful of civilization in the history. Likewise, religious sense and the expression of the sacred are constantly subjected to public mockery, scorn, and in some cases, even censorship and cancellation. The rule of law is under threat too. The state considers himself as the only creator of law, with an explicit denial and exclusion of any natural law idea. Finally, freedom is threatened in countless ways, especially religious freedom. Because of this, humanist conservatism, national conservatism, religious conservatism, lawful conservatism, and freedom conservatism are very welcome here. Every conservatism is welcome here. For that, thank you for to be here, and I hope you enjoyed this conference and your stay in Madrid in the University San Pablo CEU. Thank you very much.
If you allow me just add one word, because Barbara mentioned about team of New Direction, Vitor and Robert. Let me thank you very much for your great engagement into this conference. As a president, it's my obligation, because your work is absolutely unique. And many thanks again, guys. Thank you.
Thank you all for those eye-opening and crucial speeches, just like the one that we are going to hear next, and is the first keynote speaker that I'm proud to present, Dr. Eamon Butler, co-founder and director of the Adam Smith Institute in the United Kingdom. He's economist and author of more than 20 books, including the works of Hayek, Friedman, and von Mises. And just to remind you that, quick reminder that the plenary sessions are being recorded, but all the roundtables won't. So you can speak freely anytime, of course, but just keep in mind that all plenary sessions are being recorded, but the roundtables won't. With no further ado, let's welcome Dr. Eamon Butler.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction, which I'm sure I don't deserve. Mind you, I've got a bad back, and I don't think I deserve that either. We were speculating in the office as to why I was actually invited to give this important opening talk at this conference. My colleagues, rather uncharitably, I think, said, well, it can't be because of your film star qualities, unless the film star they had in mind was Jabba the Hutt. Maybe, they said, you were simply last on their list. Or perhaps it was because I'm British and therefore probably pretty cheap. And I'm also one of the few Brits that can actually get here because I also have an Irish passport, so I don't have to queue up for 2 hours behind the Iranians and the Afghanis and the Chinese. What I hope you've invited me for is because of my long experience in running a think tank. And after 45 years of running a think tank, you really know everything there is to know about that business. The only difficulty is that you've then reached an age where the problem is to remember it all. But I do remember a couple of very basic things. Firstly, the two crucial rules of running a think tank. Firstly, you must hire the very best people you can. And secondly, take all the credit for everything they do. And the second thing that I've discovered over the years is that we must all work together in our movement. We have a big and important job to do. We have to challenge the soft left, sometimes hard left consensus in our countries. We need to uphold our mutual values and to do so with confidence. We need to give people, and particularly young people, I think, a vision of a different sort of world in which it's not run by governments, it's run by individuals and people. And we have to engineer practical policies that will bring about this kind of new society. And I think if you're going to do that, you've got to get along with lots of different people. People who have different views and even hostile views. And you need to persuade them, if you can, to share your ideals and your policies. And at the very least, you need to persuade them not to oppose our ideas and our policies. And I think, again, the key to do that is to understand the other person's point of view. Understand who it is that you're talking to. Let me give you a very trivial example. Many, many, many years ago, I had a friend who ran a public relations agency. And he got me a part-time job editing a business magazine in the City of London. And every week I would go in and there'd be a big pile of mail like that, all press releases that I would go through. And one day, my friend was sitting in the office alongside me, and he looked at me as I was going through the mail. And some of the envelopes I would open, and I'd put it to one side. Some I would open, and I would put it in the bin. And others, I would look at the envelope and just put it straight in the bin without looking at it. And he said, this is a man who makes his livelihood out of writing press releases and doing PR. He said, you must tell me what the secret is. How do you do that? And I said, well, it's quite simple. Firstly, the press release has got to be relevant to my readers. Many of them I just chuck because I know anything from that source is not relevant. It's also got to be written in such a way that, look, I'm a lazy journalist, all right? I want something I can change a line at the top and a line at the bottom, and then I can run that as a perfectly good story. And that's what we do now in the Adam Smith Institute. You see it from the journalist's point of view, so that when you're writing a press release, you think, what's going to interest that journalist and what's going to cause them least work? And it's exactly the same in public policy development. You have to understand people's point of view, and then you can make progress. We've got lots of panels here today and tomorrow, for example, on trade policy. Well, every economist almost in the world favors free trade versus protection. Free trade, we've known since Adam Smith, benefits both sides. People wouldn't trade unless they both benefited from the deal. And it's been incredibly successful since about 1990. Spread of free trade around the world has taken perhaps 1 billion people out of dollar-a-day poverty. It now hardly exists except in sub-Saharan Africa. When I was born, 4/5 of the population of the planet lived in dollar-a-day poverty. Even in the 1990s, it was 2/3. That's the difference that it's made. But at the same time, people worry about, well, will our jobs be lost to foreign firms? Or what about our security of supply? Will our farmers and our rural way of life be affected? So these are real concerns. And we need to, if you're in favor of free trade, you need to understand those concerns and to address them and to create policy which is mindful of them. We've also got another panel on regulation. And there again, there are clear benefits to deregulation. American businesses, for example, are far more innovative. Look at the tech world, far more innovative than businesses in the European Union. Why is that? Several reasons. Taxation was one of them, but regulation is a major one. That you can do things in America, and indeed you can do things in the UK, that you can't do in Europe. But on the other hand, big business in particular promotes regulation because it keeps out the competition, loads costs on the competition. And the public rather like regulation because it makes them feel safe. And they don't see the downside cost, the depressing effect on innovation. And so we need to understand those concerns and to engineer a regulatory policy that's mindful of them. Migration, too, is a probably going to be a very controversial panel. There are benefits of free movement and people being able to work where their skills are most valued. But at the same time, recently, we've had wars and we've had the rise of tyrants, but it's also become easier to travel. So we get people arriving in their hundreds of thousands on the shores of Europe. And that, of course, puts a strain on any society. And so people get concerned about the erosion of their national identity and their values and their culture. So we need to be mindful of all of that. And even in this room, there are many different views which we will address in our various panels. We have liberals and conservatives and people who think culture is much more important than economic freedom, and people who think nationalism is important and are against migration. We've got Hayekians and Misesians and freed maniacs and probably a few Randroids and maybe even recently some Jordanians. Lots of different views, but whether you're internationalist, nationalist, conservative, liberal, it doesn't matter. As previous speakers have been saying, let's remember who are our real, oh, I'm not allowed to use the word enemies, am I? What was your word? I can't remember. Our real opponents are. Those are people who will destroy all of the free society. They would destroy the free economy. They would destroy culture. They would destroy nations. They destroy freedom in the name of some ideal that they would force people into. That's the real disagreement, not between ourselves, but between freedom and slavery, creation and destruction, people or ideologies. It's us versus them. That's the real conflict. And that's why I'm very glad to see that we're having panels on communism and the Cold War. Fewer and fewer people can now actually remember what the Soviet Union or Mao's China were like. Nobody under 40 can remember the Berlin Wall. And the witnesses to the outrages that happened in those regimes are gradually passing away. And we must not allow people to forget the reality of socialism, where it always turns out. And they need constant and graphic reminders. It's one of the reasons why my own institute has commissioned a couple of television documentaries, which we're calling The Real History of Communism, just showing its awful effect on people and their prosperity. And by the way, don't let the bad guys try to confuse their theory with our reality, to compare their ideal of a socialist state with the reality of what we've got that we call capitalism today. It's a very unfair comparison, that. You can't possibly win that debate. We can win in theory or we can win in practice. We can win in theory because our system believes in freedom, not force. We win in practice because we produce freedom and prosperity. And not just that, we also produce better healthcare, a better environment, better public services, better education. Look at North Korea and South Korea, for example. There's one nation that was divided by a civil war and devastated by a civil war, and in 1953-54, it was the poorest place on the planet, both North and South. And now you look at it, and the South Korean economy is 57 times bigger than the North Korean economy. There's an iconic picture of Korea taken at night. And in the South, every town and village is a blaze of light. In the North, there's a little bit of light around Pyongyang, and the rest is complete darkness. It tells you a lot. And it's one of the reasons why people in South Korea live 10 years longer than their, in many cases, relations in the North. Their children are 10 times less likely to die before they reach adulthood. Their rivers are dirtier in North Korea. Their forests are less verdant because people strip the bark off trees to eat it. They need walls and wires and boats and guns to keep people in. And yet, since 1998, when records began, 34,000 people have successfully fled from North Korea to the south. And countless others never made it. So that's the real, I still want to use the word enemy, that's the real combat that we're confronting. And as Ben Franklin said at the beginning of the American Revolution, friends, we need to hang together. Otherwise, we'll all hang separately. And that's what we must do here. We must celebrate our agreement on basic core values, to remain allies despite our many differences. Indeed, use those differences, as previous speakers have said, to test our arguments and hone them and improve them so that we can take them away. And in many cases, you know, I think our differences are not as deep as we think. We all want a good society. We just maybe disagree on how we get there. We want a society in which government authority comes from the people, not the other way around, in which citizens manage their own lives. And often it's just the methods that divide us. And even then, I think, you know, it's not a sort of left-right axis politics. It's multiphasic. It's, you know, two axes, perhaps. Are you in favor of more liberalism or more control on the economic sphere? And are you in favor of more freedom or more control in social matters, culture and morals? Well, I think most of us here in this room agree that we should have a lot of freedom on economic matters. On social issues, we may disagree. So there's a huge spectrum there that we can, of agreement, that we can occupy. I mean, I support individual freedom and free movement, but at the same time, I realize that nationalism is probably the most important force and powerful force in politics today. But if you want to know how to manage this, you need look no further than Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. Margaret Thatcher, who we will honor tonight, espoused common sense values. She lived over a corner shop. And she proposed liberal economic policies, but was mindful of the disruption that they would cause and created opportunities for people who were displaced by it. But at the same time, she had a powerful defense of her country and its culture. Reagan, as well, espoused this strangely American idea of rugged individual freedom, but at the same time, a deep sense of being rooted in the local community. And he argued for a strong America that would stand up against tyranny, along with a free society. So let's remember, we're friends here. We're actually on the same side. We share fundamental values. We have real competence to take on. So let's agree to cooperate together, to share information, to explore our ideas together, and to reinforce each other's ideas and policies as we move forward. It's a kind of rainbow coalition that we've got here. So let's take that rainbow coalition to the enemy, confidently expounding our ideas of freedom and prosperity and fairness and justice and progress and humanity and a bottom-up way of running one's country. And let people out there know that there is an alternative to overbearing, overreaching governments. And indeed, let those who are facing tyranny in Iran, in China, in North Korea, even closer to home in Ukraine, let them know that they are not alone. let's realize that it is we who have the moral high ground, we who propose freedom, humanity, and civil society, not force, oppression, and poverty. And so, my friends, when we leave this room tomorrow, let's stride out confidently, and crucially, let's stride out together and deliver that vision to the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now it's time for the roundtables, but there's a few things you need to know first. Remember, they are not going to be recorded. That's a point to keep in mind also. Also, remember the format. You will hear first 5 minutes from each people that is on the program. They will say their opening statements. Then you can speak, you can ask, you can say whatever you want. It will be a debate. And then will be the conclusion of the round table. If you're interested now in the first one, that is, well, it's going to answer the question if the free trade have a future nowadays. That's session number 1 that will take place in room 2.5 is on the second floor, room 2.5, and the second session that will be simultaneously to the other one is going to discuss Europe as a regulatory superpower. And that roundtable is going to take place in the main floor, in the entrepreneurship room, the main floor. And remember that after the roundtables, we will have a coffee break, approximately 11:30 a.m. And then I will see you all here at noon for the big debate of the day. Noon, we will all see here in the same plenary room, this one. Also remember that after the big debate, we will have a lunch, 1 p.m., and it's a lunch that is a collation lunch that is organized by the Tholos Foundation. And remember that if you want to present your organization or talk about your country's politics, you have to email Lorenzo Montaneri if you want to do that during the lunch. But for now, let's go to the roundtable. Session number 1, that's Free Trade Have a Future, room 2.5. Session number 2, Europe as a regulatory superpower in the main room. In the main floor, in the entrepreneurship room. And we all see you here at noon. Thank you all. So we are back. Thank you all. I hope you had a good coffee break, and the roundtables, I hope they will be interesting for you. So now we have the big debate, and we call it big because we're going to hear what a libertarian have to say and a national conservative has to say. What do they have in common, those unique ideologies? What do they have in common? And for me, most importantly, what are the things they don't agree on? So we are going to hear for 90 minutes, approximately, this big debate that will be moderated by Ellen Fantini, managing editor of the European Conservative magazine, a quarterly print publication that represents views from all across the political right. That's all right? Yes. So, I will leave you with them, with the big debate. You know, this is a big session that is going to be recorded, but you can ask whatever you want when the moderator tells you so, and ask all the questions you want, speak freely, and we will have a debate as we were hoping for. So, it's all.
Thank you very much. Welcome to the big debate. I am Ellen Fantini, the managing editor of the European Conservative, and I'm your moderator. A few words about the structure of this debate, which we really hope will turn into a discussion. Each speaker will be given 15 minutes for their opening remarks. We'll then, the moderator, will then give them about 5 minutes each for rebuttals or replies. And if it appears to me that another round of rebuttals and replies is necessary, I'll encourage that. Otherwise, I may ask questions, or I will turn it over to the audience. At 1 o'clock, we will definitely turn it over to the audience. And the audience members will have a chance to ask their questions. These are questions, not statements in the forms of questions, because the idea is to elicit some discussion with the speakers. So we would ask for short, concise questions for either of the speakers or both. We'll give them a chance to reply, fairly short replies, so that we can do a lot of back and forth with the audience. So, in the About Us section of our website at the European Conservative, we say that we publish a variety of writers and a range of viewpoints on the right, broadly conceived, including but not limited to agrarians, anti-statists, classical liberals, libertarians, decentralists, integralists, monarchists, nationalists, populists, radical localists, sovereigntists, and defenders of the Judeo-Christian and Western tradition. So perhaps that's part of the big tent that's been discussed, and it's certainly where we can locate the subjects of the big debate today. That is national conservatism, perhaps versus libertarianism. Both are powerful but seemingly competing worldviews that sit on two ends of the pro-freedom, or let's say right, center movement. So what, if anything, do these two ideologies have in common? And if they do have anything in common, how can these common points be expanded upon? So I wanted to flip a coin to decide who would go first, but my colleagues here were much more gentlemanly and just agreed on who would go first. So our first speaker will be James Orr. He's the UK chairman of the Edmund Burke Foundation, organizer of the National Conservative Conference in London in the UK. He's associate professor of philosophy of religion at the Faculty of Divinity at the University of Cambridge. He was previously a MacDonald postdoctoral fellow in theology, ethics, and public life at Christ Church, Oxford. And before entering academia, he worked as a lawyer in corporate finance at Freshfields and Sullivan and Cromwell. His research interests span analytic philosophy of religion, continental phenomenology, moral philosophy, and political theology. He is joined by our second speaker, Yaron Brook, who was the executive director of the Ayn Rand Institute from 2000 to 2017, and he's now the chairman of their board. He is host of the Yaron Brook Show on YouTube and wherever other fine podcasts are found. He's co-authored many books focused on capitalism and its benefits, the benefits of free markets, including In Pursuit of Wealth, the moral case for finance, Equal is Unfair, America's Misguided Fight Against Income Inequality, and Free Market Revolution, How Ayn Rand's Ideas Can End Big Government. He's also a contributing author to Neoconservatism, An Obituary for an Idea, Winning the Unwinnable War, America's Self-Crippled Response to Islamic Totalitarianism, and Big Tent, the story of the conservative revolution as told by the thinkers and doers who made it happen. So, without further ado, James Orr, the floor is yours. 15 minutes, and don't ignore your moderator because I'll be making hand signals. Thank you.
Ellen, thank you very much indeed for facilitating this debate. Thank you to Yaron for agreeing to take part. Thank you especially to the great Robert Tyler for putting this great event together. It's a great privilege to be here. Thank you for having me. So just to look, a few remarks, and I'm going to try and be as combative as I can, and I say this as somebody who is a great admirer of libertarianism and indeed a great admirer of Yaron's work. I've read many of his books over the years, and I continue to benefit enormously from the works of the great Friedrich von Hayek and Ludwig von Mises, the work of the Adam Smith Institute and the Institute for Economic Affairs. So I come here not to bury libertarianism, but to praise it for the most part. But I will try and fight the corner for national conservatism, at least as I understand it in the British context. So one of the protocols for the national conservative, in my view, is that we should really be speaking primarily about our respective nations. So I'm going to be relatively silent about the case of the United States, what's going on here in continental Europe, and I'll be speaking where I'm drawing examples. I'll be focusing on Britain. I'll be focusing on the UK. I'm a great believer in the response given by Solon of Athens to the person who asked, "What is the perfect society?" for whom and at what time? Now, this is the question. For whom and at what time? And I take that to be a paradigmatically conservative response. That is to say, we are allergic as conservatives to abstract utopian schema that we want to fit every single society, coerce every society into conforming to. So that does make us appear rather slippery and mercurial. But for the conservative, it is perfectly consistent, for example, to be pro the Second Amendment in the United States and to be against liberalizing gun laws in countries that have hitherto not had much experience of them, for example. But anyway, let me just kick off. Neuralgia over nationhood has intensified of late. This was especially obvious in the wake of the media reaction to the National Conservatism Conference in London back in May. Some glorious tantrums were provoked right across the spectrum. This is partly because expressions of national sentiment have begun to puncture the cozy cosmopolitanism forged in the aftermath of the Second World War and crystallized in the civilizational struggle with the Soviet Union in the second half of the 20th century. There's panic today over the stability of global supply chains, energy dependence on unscrupulous and aggressive new empires that oppose freedom in all its forms, and the continued dominance of financial institutions that not so long ago seemed to be bringing capitalism to its knees. So the case for national retrenchment across the West seems more inescapable than ever, and no more so than here in continental Europe. I say this as cards on the table and confession time, a passionate Brexiteer who grew up in Brussels, so I know whereof I speak. I've been a Brexiteer since I was 13 years old, after the Treaty of Maastricht was passed, making Her Majesty a citizen of the European Union, or Her late Majesty. But continental Europe, look, I mean, I'd like to hear more from you, but it seems to me to be ravaged by the increasingly authoritarian, dirigiste and centralized interventionist ideology of the Brussels oligarchies. And these concerns have catalyzed an international movement led by the wonderful Yoram Hazony and others of so-called national conservatives. This has swiftly emerged, in my view, to be the most promising coalition of figures championing national self-determination in the West today. We don't have, thank God, a little blue book. There is no Tory Torah. We are inspired instead by the unduly neglected English figures of Sir John Fortescue, Sir John Selden, Henry Bolingbroke, to press the case that conservatism is not, as Roger Scruton, the great Sir Roger Scruton, late lamented Sir Roger Scruton, insisted, a hesitation within liberalism. Conservatism precedes liberalism and in many ways provides the conditions of the possibility of liberalism in ways too many to enumerate. It supplies the moral frameworks and the social stability that permitted the achievements that liberals would have us believe sprung ex nihilo from the minds of Hobbes and Locke. And this is, probably one key point of difference. The national conservatism insists on the shared religious impulses, customs, notions, norms, habits that prevents a social as opposed to a constitutional revolution. The sacralizing of freedom would have been as bloody and catastrophic in Britain as it proved to be in France. For us, loyalty to nation, it's worth saying, is not really nationalism. I am made uncomfortable by the N-word, certainly in the UK context, because nationalism is typically understood to be the sort of post-1848, 19th century romantic kind of nationalism that did blight in many respects continental Europe. That is not really how things have ever been understood in the United Kingdom. The county of Hampshire is older than every European state. We have been blessed by a relatively prolonged millennium, a long millennium of relative peace and stability internally, with a brief aberration with the Puritans in the 17th century. So it is, nevertheless, the pro-nation sentiment is, as I would say, the weakest form of concrete attachment, beyond which really everything else is an abstraction that nobody is going to die for, nobody's going to live for, nobody's really going to honor. But we love what is closest to us. And this is an insight of Augustine and Aquinas and even David Hume. Not often you hear those three figures in the same sentence. Crystallized in the phrase, the law, I think it's the first law allegedly attributed to Robert Conquest, that everyone is conservative about what they know best. And these concentric circles of our affection radiate out from family to kin to village to community to guild and to country, just. But that's the limit, the outer limits of our concrete forms of attachment. For the National Conservative is the nation, but it's the weakest form of concrete attachment. We are, as National Conservatives, it is true, more committed than most conservative movements have been in the past to using the power of the state to buttress social norms and insulate the institutional landscape, especially publicly funded parts of it, against capture and corruption by the shock troops of woke progressivism. I wish it were not so, but we are where we are, and we need to deal with society and the world as it is given to us and not as we would like it to be. Social conservatism 2.0 may seem unthinkable in a nation like the UK, which is as socially liberal as Britain, but insofar as it's conserving some of the most self-evident prerequisites to human flourishing, national conservatism's strain of social conservatism is an important one. It's very different from social conservatism 1.0. We are unambiguously committed to resisting the alarming proliferation of strange new dogmas, of a new public faith that has sacralized gender ideology, divinized sexual minorities and ethnic minorities. This has, by the way, genuine electoral appeal across the old political divides. It's now routine for even the most liberally inclined of my friends and colleagues to express alarm at the rise of transhumanist technologies, the increasing indifference to human life before cradle and before grave, the nation's plummeting birth rates, the continuing corrosion of the family, and the nationalization of childcare. Indeed, across an array of cultural and biopolitical questions, national conservatisms now find themselves in a coalition with unfamiliar allies, ranging from Marxist or libertarian atheists, hi Frank, to Mumsnet activists and gender-critical feminists. Now, there are real substantive ideological differences here. This is a strange coalition of convenience, but we need it, and we need to hold it together, and national conservatism in the UK, at least, is committed to holding that coalition together and making it stronger. We need to dismantle the grievance industrial complex and to protect children from indoctrination into new ideological norms and narratives that are as poorly evidenced as they are politically partisan. So these are, this just very briefly, I've got six or 7 minutes to go. I mean, that is the sort of that is what national conservatism is, at least in its British expression. Points of disagreement with the libertarians. Well, the most obvious, I suppose, is that, look, we are committed to the Burkean ideal as national conservatives, that society is not an aggregate of featherless bipeds that just happen to occupy a random landmass. Apologies, that's a bit of a caricature of the libertarian position, but I mean, let's make it a caricature for the sake of debate. We're committed rather to the view that society is made up of natural groups, family, locality, church, regions, guilds, social classes, nation. Burke's attack on the French Revolution is so often, a revolution in the name of the individual and individual rights destroyed these traditional groups. And really the conservatives, the great thinkers that followed Burke effectively accepted this, even some liberals like Lamennais and Tocqueville. So the Burkean impulse is to say to the libertarian that absolutizing a doctrine of individualism is just as much of a menace as to the social order and true freedom of a society as the absolutizing doctrine of collectivism. Dissolving society into a sandheap of individual particles, each claiming natural rights, makes the arrival of the very collectivism that the libertarian abhors, I think, inevitable. More and more, I just have the impression, talking I can't find any libertarians at the University of Cambridge, unsurprisingly, but of the few dear friends I have who I would self-identify as libertarians in London, they sometimes talk about family and guild and church in ways that make it seem as if there is those natural groups are as hostile to freedom as the government itself, and that makes me uneasy. Second main point of disagreement. would be the insistence by conservatives, national conservatives, that freedom must be balanced with order and authority. That true freedom is not the raw, anarchic freedom of the man alone on a desert island. That true freedom, the only freedom worth having, is that freedom that is ordered freedom, that is freedom that has before it the enabling conditions of freedom. Faith, family, and flag, to give you a neatly alliterative phrase. Society is a plurality of authorities, parent over child, priest over believer, teacher over master. Freedom requires social and moral authority. It doesn't need to be coercive, it doesn't need to be dictatorial. Usually, it's the gentle, loose, protective authority that the parent has over a child or the teacher has over a student. But it is authority nonetheless, and it is an enabling condition of freedom. This is something that people find very, I think, my students certainly find very difficult to grasp, that the paradox that limits can be liberating. The suspicion is, the worry is that libertarians cannot quite strike the balance between authority and order on the one hand and freedom on the other. Excessive liberty without order removes the social scaffolding and the moral compass and confidence of a nation. So, we're not a wasteland of isolated, atomized individuals. We don't want that, because that's going to lead to excessive dependence on the state. Marriage is a good example of this. Marriage gives life meaning. It's a civilizational good. It's a solid foundation. It builds prosperity in society. It is an antidote to welfare dependence. It protects children. It produces good future citizens. If people aren't married to each other, they will end up being married to the government. Libertarians, I worry, can't explain why we should prefer our neighbors and our nation over any other. All that said, in the remaining 1 minute, we're in the trenches together. We've got to work out how to get along. That's why I was very clear to invite the great liberal defenders of sovereignty and freedom back in May, Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg, Lord Daniel Hannan, Lord David Frost. They are on our team, despite some prickly write-ups from the IEA and the Cato Institute. We're trying to craft a new form. I'm not going to use the word fusionism. This is not neo-fusionism. but nevertheless, we have to recognize that we share a common enemy, and we need to tie ourselves together no more, and that is no more true of the UK that's more true of the UK than at least anywhere else. So we need each other. We need some libertarian thinking in our economic policies as we're realizing 1 year on for the collapse from the coup against the Truss government and the attempt to run something close to a libertarian pack of libertarian policies. Look how that worked out. Not because the policies themselves were disastrous, but really because the country simply wasn't ready for it. And the argument still needs to be one there. We need libertarian thinking, but I would say that the libertarians need us even more than we need them. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your disciplined attention to the time. And now we'll turn the floor to Yaron Brook.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back here. I was at the conference 2 years ago, and a little surprised I was invited back, so thank you for inviting me back. Not sure exactly who I'm representing here. It's not like libertarians would necessarily consider me a spokesman for them. So I'm going to be speaking from the perspective of a committed individualist, and in terms of where you want to put me politically, I'll leave that up to you. I think we're in real danger of giving up on the great achievement that is Western civilization. I think we're at a crossroads, and we're going to have to decide as cultures whether we are going to sustain this great progress that has been made under the banner of Western civilization. And my fear is that the right is getting to the point of misrepresenting what Western civilization really has achieved and where it has come from. I think, the West, the last 250 years are an amazing human story. They're the most important human story, I think, since human beings came to this earth, right? This is a story of great achievement. The kind of economic progress, the kind of cultural progress, the kind of achievement that as human beings we have succeeded in is unprecedented in all of human history. You've all seen the graphs of what's happened over the last 250 years. And if we misdiagnose what caused that, if we misdiagnose what the nature of that achievement is, we are likely to lose it. It is not an achievement of old ideas. It is an achievement of new ideas. It is an achievement of a breaking of tradition, not a sustaining of tradition. The Enlightenment developed from its roots, I think, in the Renaissance. But the Enlightenment represents a break from European history, not just a continuation of ancient history. It is an identification, in my view, of two fundamental ideas as crucial for human survival and crucial for human progress. The idea that reason should be our guide, that the human mind is capable of knowing reality. This is Isaac Newton's great contribution, I think, to the Enlightenment. It is no accident that the Enlightenment, the political Enlightenment, goes hand in hand with scientific achievement, goes hand in hand with the scientific revolution. Knowledge is achievable, truth is achievable, and it's achievable by means of reason, not by means of an ancient book, not by means of revelation. And individuals are the ones who reason. And the individual is the unit that makes up society. The individual is what matters. And individuals have that capacity to discover truth and to reason. It's this rise of individualism. It's this rise of the idea of that individual can take care of himself, can prosper, can be successful, that the state, the authorities, whoever, does not get to dictate to the individual what his particular values should be. Does not get to dictate to the individual what profession he should pursue, who he should marry, what he should think. But the liberty that every individual has to pursue his values based on his mind, and the respect, therefore, that the individual gained politically during this period is what I think ultimately led to the flourishing that we saw during the Industrial Revolution and all the way to today. So this question of individualism versus collectivism is maybe the most important, certainly in politics, the most important question that we have. Is the individual sovereign? Is the individual both capable of, and does he have a right to, live his life for his own sake based on his own judgment? Or is he just a member of a collective to be dictated to how he should live, what he should do? And then it's just a question of how much liberty do we give him? How much freedom do we allow him to have? And in what realms do we allow him to have that freedom? Should life be pursued by permission, or should we pursue a permissionless society? I think that's the most important political question on the table, and this is where I struggle to find alliance with national conservatives or national anything or conservative anything, in a sense that the National Conservatives, as do all collectivists, view some kind of form of collective, a nation, a tribe, a group, as above the individual, as more important than the individual, and as dictating, therefore, the values and the life and the pursuits of the individual. That is the political spectrum, in my view, should not be left and right. It should be individualism, collectivism. And to the extent that the left and right both adhere to collectivist views, to that extent, they're both enemies of the individual. They might be enemies in different regards. They might be enemies at different points in time. It might be very much true that the left right now is the primary enemy that must be defeated. But it is collectivism which is the challenge. It is individualism that led us to the wealth and prosperity and freedoms that we have today. And it is collectivism that is risking all of that and is moving towards, dragging us towards the end of this kind of prosperity. And I'd add peace. I think one of the things that individualism ultimately leads to is the emphasis on peace. Individuals are not keen to go, die on the barricades. There has to be a really good cause to get an individualist to go and fight on the barricades. It is the rise of collectivism, in my view, which is partially responsible for the increased threat of war, and the existence of war, and of course the increased threat of war around the globe. We're entering now a Cold War II, without really knowing who started it, why we're doing it, how do we stop it? Does anybody really want to stop it? I don't see anybody wanting to stop it. It seems like both in the US, both left and right seem to be eager to accelerate our descent into some form of Cold War. We've got a war in Russia versus Ukraine, which is very much triggered by I believe Russian nationalism and by empire seeking. It is these ideas, these collectivistic ideas, that I think are putting the achievements of Western civilization at real risk and in real danger. So I fear for the future. I fear for the future because of the rise of these ideas, on the right and on the left. I'm not sure where you would. I'm not sure where we put. I don't know, Putin these days. Is he right? Is he left? Where does he belong on the political spectrum? Is he an ally? Is he an enemy? I mean, one of the most ugly phenomena I see on the American right today is a affiliation with Putin, an affiliation with Russia, a justification of Putin and Russia in the name of fighting the left. He is our ally, after all, because he hates the left. Is that a good reason to align with a thug, a monster like Putin? Allow me to be skeptical about that. So I think we need to rediscover our roots, and our roots are not in the collectivism of the past. Our roots are not in the collectivism of pre-Enlightenment Europe that led to nothing but bloodshed. Our roots are individualism, as framed by John Locke, as framed by the great Scottish Enlightenment, as framed even by the French Enlightenment. And let me just say something about the French Revolution. The French Revolution was an anti-Enlightenment revolution. Rousseau is an anti-Enlightenment figure. He's a collectivist. He's much more of a traditionalist than the real Enlightenment figures. He rejects the very principles on which the Enlightenment was founded: reason, science, and individualism. The French Revolution is the opposite of the real Enlightenment revolution, which was the American Revolution. The American Revolution is a revolution of individualism, and therefore is a revolution, a real revolution, and is what stands in counter to the French. The French Revolution is much more of a leftist revolution, a revolution of socialists and collectivists. So I'm supposed to say a few things on how we can work together, or should work together. I hope at the very, so it's a challenge, I think, to work together. We have to recognize that. There are real disagreements here, not superficial. They go to the heart of what politics should be about. They go to the heart of what life is about. They go to the heart of very foundational principles of morality and politics. So we should not, first of all, minimize the disagreements, otherwise we get nowhere. I think to the extent that there is a shared agreement about economic freedom and economic liberty, that should be pursued. I worry, at least in the United States, and I don't know what the UK National Conservatives hold, but certainly in the US, and in the 10 Principles of National Conservatism that were published by Yom Hazony in the United States, that we do not share economic liberty, but to the extent that we do, great. Let's fight at least for those freedoms. To the extent that there is still some respect for individualism and individual, and by the way, individualism does not mean living on a desert island. I mean, that would be anti-individualist. I live on an island, but not on a desert island, and there's an airport nearby. And I love hanging out with other human beings. As self-interested as I am, I love other human beings because they are real value to me. Individualists love to gather and to associate and to socialize. We even like the nation state. I actually just came back from a debate in New York. On Monday, I did a debate in New York with Brian Kaplan. Some of you might know Brian Kaplan, who's an economist from George Mason University, who was defending anarcho-capitalism. I was defending the state. So individualists love the nation state when it's a free nation state, when it's a nation state that protects the individual from coercion, from force, and from the real enemies of liberty, which is authority with a gun, backed up by a gun. That is the real enemies of freedom and liberty. So to the extent, we might share some ideas about parts of foreign policy. We might share some suspicion of overly interventionism, too much interventionism, too much attempts to project American power globally and internationally, and coerce other countries to establish democracies or to establish values by force. So there might be areas in which we can cooperate, but let's not forget that even when we cooperate on those areas, that there are real fundamental differences that guide the motivation for each side. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I think we should do a round of replies and rebuttals. 5 minutes each, with James Orr first.
Good. Thank you, Yaron, very, very much indeed. Lots to agree with there, quite a lot to disagree with. So quickly, I mean, look, on the Enlightenment, this idea that reason springs from Zeus's limbs in 1776, 1770, 1781, I just think it's just not true. There's plenty of reasoning going on in Plato and in Aristotle and in Aquinas and in Augustine and in Occam and in Scotus. This is not something that is new to the late 18th century. In fact, if you look at a lot of my favorite Enlightenment philosophers, David Hume and Adam Smith, they are extremely skeptical of reason. Reason is and can only ever be the slave of the passions, fit only to be her slave. So there's a part of the genius of Smith and Hume, it seems to me, is to have a certain healthy skepticism towards reason and to be attentive to the non-cognitive dimensions of our engagement with reality. I also question whether or not individualism and the doctrine of and the sacralizing of the individual is the best, or let alone the only explanation for the extraordinary, and I would not question these for a minute, the extraordinary successes that capitalism has brought to the world in the last 200 years. And again, I think it's part of Hayek's genius to recognize that it's not so much the individual as individuals allowed the freedom to interact with one another and to, as it were, shape society in ways that rely on a kind of collective wisdom and rationality that is too big for a single head. And Hayek, it seems to me, has a great respect for tradition, the wisdom of tradition, and a great respect for the basic conservative outlook that ideas age in reverse. We get weaker as we get older, ideas get stronger, and the longer they've been around, there should be a defeasible presumption that they've got something worth telling us. That includes old books, old ideas, and even, dare I say it, old sacred texts. Peace and war, well, yes. I mean, to the extent that there is skepticism of the Ukraine war in the United States, I note that it does come from figures who would certainly align closely with the national conservative movement. I think there would be a similar skepticism to crazy foreign ventures. In fact, I think national conservatives distinguish themselves very sharply from the catastrophic consequences of neoconservatism in the early years of this century. But again, we are where we are. What is the libertarian response to an unprovoked imperialist invasion of a sovereign nation state? It surely can't be the principle that appeasement and conscientious objection are the order of the day at all times and in all places. That, thank God, was not the view of the British elites and the Allied elites in World War I or in World War II. So, yes, hearty agreement that we shouldn't be starting crazy wars, but once they're started by others, enemies of freedom, we should step up to the plate and not allow the enemies of freedom to trample all over our freedoms.
Thank you for that. 5 minutes to you.
Yeah, so quickly on reason. Of course, reason has its origins in ancient Greece. In many respects, I think those are the roots of Western civilization. It's again, I'm not sure who we represent here, but Hume sets the seeds for, unfortunately, the decline of the Enlightenment because of his deep-rooted skepticism of reason. I think that is a basic flaw towards the end of the Enlightenment that we are still fighting and we're still dealing with to this day. Again, individualism does not assume that individuals on desert island and don't interact with one another. Of course they do. Markets are markets of individuals. But to negate the individual in the name of a collective is what I'm criticizing. Individuals have to work together under the rule of law, under the defense of individual rights, under a proper perception of rights, which I think Locke did a pretty good job of presenting. That is what has led to our success. It is the focus on the individual. It is the focus on individual initiative. It is the focus on a permissionless, or relatively permissionless society, and the ability of entrepreneurs to drag us kicking and screaming into the future. Kicking and screaming. There's not a single innovation that we did not, in the name of some interest group, in the name of some tradition, did not try to stop, whether it's driverless cars right now, or artificial intelligence, or Uber, or all the other inventions going back to the steam engine that were resisted by traditionalists. So the future progress is a future progress imagined by individuals, and created by individuals in interaction with other people, in cooperation with other people, in voluntary association with other people. That is what has led to the great success. And of course, the United States is this amazing experiment that has worked pretty well so far, although one wonders about its future, but has worked pretty well so far. I think the United States and the UK have really, to the large extent, dragged the rest of the world forward through innovation and progress. These are the countries where, almost all the innovations over the last 250 years have come from, as uncomfortable as that may be for many, because they emphasize the idea of individualism. They emphasize the idea of individuals free in markets to pursue their values, their ideas, and their progress. I think there was some misunderstanding about my position in Ukraine. I am absolutely for supporting Ukraine. Indeed, I blame the West for not supporting Ukraine enough and holding it back quite a bit, particularly the Biden administration. We approved tanks, but a year late. We approved F-16s, but a year and a half later. My concern is it's exactly the opposite, that indeed it is those affiliated with national conservatism, or some of those affiliated with national conservatism in the United States, who are skeptical about the Ukraine and about resisting because, and here I'm basically going off of Jordan Peterson, right? Jordan Peterson is skeptical of the support for Ukraine. Why? Because Putin, for him, represents the West. Putin, for him, is the good guy because he stands with the Judeo-Christian tradition and he stands in opposition to the left, because on family values, Putin is our ally. Now that to me is sickening. It is literally sickening to affiliate with a thug because he supposedly shares an enemy, right? I don't think I share anything with Putin. So this to me is scary about what is happening on the right. And by the way, some libertarians on the right as well, right? So this is American libertarians and American conservatives. There's way too much hostility to Ukraine and friendliness towards Russia on the right today. And again, it is a barrier for people like me, at least, to find common ground. I find common ground much more with people in Europe who get it, I think, who get who Putin is and what he represents than they seem to do in the United States. Look, an individualist foreign policy is a foreign policy that says that to the extent that there are threats to the individual rights of your citizens, it is your responsibility to defend them, to protect them. And there is no question that Putin represents a threat to the individual rights of American citizens. Certainly, it represents a threat to the individual rights of Europeans. And to the extent that we can help somebody else fight a war to protect us from him, to that extent, we should support it.
Thank you very much. I think we could spend the next 4 or 5 hours doing 5-minute rebuttal statements and probably enjoy it very much. But I think probably the audience is really eager to dive into this. I don't know if we have microphones for the audience. Okay, so I'm going to ask people to line up. I think that's the only way to do it. Because otherwise hands go up at various times. Just there's fine.
The mic is in the back. It's coming to you.
Yes. I think this is the easiest way. Otherwise, my nearsightedness will seem ideological. Okay, so ground rules again. These are questions. You can provide context for the question, but do try to make it short. If it's for one of them, let us know. If it's for both of them, let us know. Thanks.
So this is primarily for James. It seems to me that the fundamental disagreement that you have is over reason. And as you said, reason is the puppet of the emotions. I mean, you quoted Hume on that. And if you are going by emotions, if you say that what drives you is this feeling of belonging to the country or something of the sort, then why is Yaron on this panel and not someone representing the modern left, because they also go by feelings. So in terms of how you go about things, wouldn't you have more in common with someone who goes by emotions? The only difference would be the type of emotion, and they're wrong on the emotion that they hold.
Just to be clear, I was simply making the point that some of the great figures of the Enlightenment, I know Yaron doesn't think they are part of the Enlightenment, if David Hume is not a paradigmatic Enlightenment philosopher, I don't really know who is. And I'd say the same is true of Rousseau. I was simply making the point that just as reason precedes the Enlightenment, non-reason, appealing to non-cognitive dimensions of our engagement with reality, is also is something that gets special emphasis in the Enlightenment. So it was really just it was a corrective. But yes, I mean, I think that it is easy for us to elevate reason with a capital R and to think of it in sort of Kantian terms, purely in terms of sort of, ratiocination. There are many, and I don't want to be a postmodernist here, but I'm simply saying that there are many different modes of rational engagement with the world as we find it. And some of those forms of rationality will be more powerful when dispersed, as Hayek saw, diachronically across a tradition and synchronically with the price mechanisms within it at any given point in a society. And none of those, those are insights that develop and get a special force and energy in the wake of the Enlightenment. But no, I'm not sort of appealing to emotion and homo psychologicus. I resent and resist the therapeutic culture and the triumph of the therapeutic in all its forms. But I don't want to swing too hard in the other direction and simply say that individual ratiocination should be the benchmark for what reason consists in.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing. The importance here of reason. And we can discuss Hume later, but the importance here of reason is, without identifying reason as man's, I think, basic means of survival, the way in which we succeed in life, the way in which we choose our values and strive towards our values, one has a hard time allowing individuals the freedom that I think they deserve. It leaves it open to others, right, to dictate our values for us. And so the idea that individuals can take responsibility for their own lives and thrive by using their own minds is crucial to the very idea of liberty and freedom. And without it, I think that idea falls and you get authoritarian government where somebody else gets to dictate our values to us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next question. And once you've asked your question, if you could just hand the microphone to the next person in line, that would be helpful.
The lion's disappeared.
My question will be to our libertarian representative. You mentioned that Isaac Newton's great contribution was declaring that a man has the ability to know reality through reason. I'm paraphrasing. And there is another quote that he's very famous for. And that is, if I saw further, it's because I stood on the shoulders of giants. So that is a recognition of something else, that we do stand on the shoulders of tradition, of other men, of the intellectual community that came before us, the moral community that created us, and just all around the conditions that made us being there possible. So my question is, can you concede the difference between a community and a collectivism, or community and a collective? And the community, in my mind, would be something like a family, a congregation, a nation, and collectivist unit would be something that I grew up in. Some communist utopia of egalitarian blobs. And this is my question, community versus the collective. Can we agree that there is a difference?
Yes, I definitely think there's a difference. I am all for community and very against collectives. And the fundamental difference is that a community is a community of individuals. You can leave it, you can enter it, it's a voluntary association. You get to decide about which community you choose. Now, I'm an immigrant. I've moved my entire life from place to place, and ultimately I've chosen where I want to live. I've chosen my community. I've chosen who to affiliate with. Collective is something that's imposed on you. It's very difficult, and sometimes you choose that imposition, but it places the collective above the individual. The collective then becomes more important than the individual. All of our political leaders talk about you should all strive to sacrifice for greater good. Really? What greater good? The greater good of a collective, of the nation, of my tribe, That's what I reject. Yeah, I'm willing to fight for liberty and freedom, but that's because they're values to me, not because they're values to some group that has imposed them on me. So collectivism is the placing of the collective above the individual. Community is a collection of individuals who choose to be part of that community. The pretense here is that we don't have families. I have a wife. I have 2 children. I have a family. But I also, pursued my own life, and if that meant moving 5,000 miles away from my parents, so be it. So I didn't stick to family because that's the be and end all. The be all, end all is ultimately my life, my values for me, right?
James.
Can I just add very quickly on Newton and this idea that the scientific revolution emerges only because of this sudden vogue for empiricism in the late 17th and 18th centuries ignores the enormous role that a creationist monotheistic religious framework had to play in the approaches of our great scientists, in Copernicus and in Kepler, even Galileo, and is certainly Newton himself, who wrote a great deal more theology than he did physics. And this is the so-called Needham problem. Why is it that advanced civilizations like China, far more advanced millennia ago than us, did not bring up a Newton or a Darwin or a Kepler or a Copernicus? There was a basic conviction, religiously inspired conviction, that nature would give up its secrets, that it was intelligible because it is the product, the created outcome of a rational, a supremely rational purpose. And had Newton rejected all of that, then I don't think we would have had the same energy in the scientific revolution as was uniquely the case in monotheistic cultures.
Yeah, so can I, because you did say about Newton and standing on giants, I completely agree that we stand on giants. We're probably going to disagree who the giants were, but I definitely agree that all knowledge builds on previous knowledge. But look, if we're going to define why China didn't advance as much as the West, the roots, in my view, are far more the fact that China never had an Aristotle than that China never had a Judeo-Christian tradition. It is Aristotle who brings to the forefront reason and science. It is Aristotle that has a metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics, and that integrates the three. It is the rediscovery of Aristotle by the Catholic Church through Thomas Aquinas that brings those ideas back, in a sense, and establishes them part of the Christian tradition. But it's that secularism that I think also lays the foundations for Renaissance and therefore for Enlightenment. And during this entire period, what is happening is that religion is slowly being, its power and its importance is slowly being reduced and placed into the personal, as a personal issue, rather than as a political, scientific, epistemological and metaphysical issue. And yes, everybody was religious in the 18th century, and almost everybody was religious in the 18th century and previously. But religion played a smaller and smaller and smaller role, and a greater and greater and greater role was played by reason. And it's that opening that allows for the scientific revolution to happen, and it's that rediscovery of Aristotle and the Greeks that allows that to happen. There's nothing in the Old Testament that brings about the existence of science.
Yeah. Can I just ask a question to both of you, which is motivated by my concern that there's a false polarization between tradition and the individual. I mean, my reading of the Enlightenment is that it wasn't just simply Hume, but even people like in the 19th century, like Mills, who really represented liberal ideals in its most systematic form, Spencer, and all these individuals recognized the importance of tradition, but that's just by the by. My question is very simple. At a moment when both tradition and the individual is under fierce attack, when there's a veritable civilizational war being waged against both of these kind of concepts, which are crucial, I think, for everybody in this room. I don't think there's anybody in here who doesn't appreciate the role of the individual. There's nobody in this room, I think, who doesn't understand that their roots in some way or shape or form constitutes who they are. Human beings, by definition, are historical beings with clear roots. Isn't it the case that everybody in this panel and this room has got something in common in having to defend a civilizational perspective, a civilizational outlook that gave meaning to tradition and gave meaning to the individual? And it seems to me that our differences aside, we got to find a way that instead of having a false battle between these two concepts, there are some genuine differences. We have got to find a way of giving a validation and an authority to these two concepts, because otherwise we're going to lose the battles from within the West by people who are against both of these concepts.
But here's the challenge. There are people in this room who would like to impose their values on me. There are people in this room who would like to tell me how to live my life. There are people in this room who would like to tell me who to trade with and who I can't trade with. There are people in this room who would like to limit my ability to move from place to place and where I should live and where I can't live and where I can't live. So there are people in this room who might say they're pro the individual, but then want to limit me as an individual in terms of how I live and where I live and what I consume and who I engage with and who I associate with. They want to limit my freedom and my liberty, and that is a challenge. And that's why it's important for us to have a robust debate and to have these disagreements aired, and maybe we can come to agreement and maybe we can't. But I'm not willing to give up, in the name of fighting the left, to give up my liberty over here in order to fight. I've got two parties who are trying to take away my liberty. I get to choose. Maybe you guys want to take away less of my liberty than the left. But I'm not willing to give up any of my liberty, at least not until, and I'm willing to fight in order to preserve it. So we should have this discussion as debate. I should be in a position to at least try to convince you to leave me alone. Because that's all we're asking for, right? Is leave the individual free to pursue his own life and don't impose your values on them. And as long as you're willing to do that, I don't care what values you pursue. I don't care what traditions you follow. You can follow any traditions you want, as long as you don't force me to follow the traditions you think are appropriate.
James.
I don't think I've ever quoted the English socialist R.H. Tawney favorably before, but I'm going to do so now. Freedom for the pike is death for the minnow. It's all very easy to say, I'm going to move 5,000 miles away from my parents because, I want to move to this beautiful island. And wonderful. That is not the case for everyone. That is not the case for every section of society. And the Conservative point of view is that we are all in this together. That does not mean, that's not a recipe for collective coercion. It's certainly not a recipe for cosmopolitan coercion, that we're seeing increasingly among the globalists in Davos. We passionately resist that. But we have to think of ourselves as a national community, as a moral community. And that is sometimes going to involve constraints on individual freedoms. You'll all be familiar with the tragedy of the commons. The libertarian solution to that seems to be to just get rid of the commons. I don't see how that really improves things. If I suddenly take some glorious piece of the national forest in the United Kingdom and it's all privatized, I might very well just cut it all. Maybe the rational thing to do would be to cut it all down and sell the timber and make a profit. When in fact the rational thing to do would be to open up some camping holidays and hand the thing on to my children and my grandchildren and so on and so forth. So look, there are you can consult the textbooks, but there are obviously justifiable circumstances where individual freedom must be constrained, not least to enable true entrepreneurship and individual freedoms. We need protection of property rights. We need the enforcement of contracts. We need secure borders. We need clear democratic mechanisms in order to set in place the conditions of the possibility of free enterprise and free trade.
Thank you very much. Next question.
Thank you for the incredible debate and discussion. I have the honor of seeing Yaron Brook debate twice in 1 week on 2 continents. So, but I'm wondering if this great debate can be boiled down to a simple question. And this question will have 3 parts to it, though. But the first is, can the simple question be, what's the better organizing policy principle? My nation first or freedom first? So the second part is that, I would suggest from history that my nation first is extremely problematic, having, probably driven World War I and World War II. And that freedom first is a far better organizing principle and gets around the problems that you just mentioned if you're considering maximizing everybody's freedom, not just the freedom of the pike, right? Everybody's freedom. So isn't that a slam dunk win for Yaron? And third, maybe isn't the compromise that it's a reasonable position for citizens of any nation to say, British freedom first or American freedom first, in consideration of the globe, that you have to think about your nation's freedom first, and that you're standing on solid ground, Mr. Orr, when you say British freedom first, because you have a long tradition of British freedom, and that makes more sense than just Britain first, right or wrong. So 3-part question, have at it.
No, I take your point. But I think it's simply a false dichotomy. The idea that to be in favor of freedom for my own nation means to be opposed to the freedom of other nations. It simply doesn't follow. Loving my country, I love my wife. That doesn't mean I hate all other women. I love my country, and in fact, it's because I love my own country that I recognize the love for the country of others, particularly at gatherings like this. That I love. What I love about Hungarians is that they're Hungarian and that they love Hungary. What I love about the French is that they love France and they are pro their own freedoms. Now, First World War, Second World War, let's not go down those rabbit holes. Was it nationalism? Was it a kind of an imperializing ambition? Ideology played a role, of course, in the Second World War as well. Look, it doesn't seem to me that there's anything intrinsically belligerent in the pro-nation position that is not true of, say, a collectivist position or an imperializing nation state. I'm just trying to think of an example of a libertarian state. I mean, maybe true libertarianism has never been tried. Has it been tried? If it is such a slam dunk for Yaron, why hasn't this perfect philosophy been implemented? Where has it been implemented? I can't think of any examples. Switzerland?
Well, sorry.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if you were finished. In terms of where's it been implemented, I certainly think the northern states of the United States during the 19th century was as close as we've ever come, and they did really, really well. I think Hong Kong is not a bad example in the 20th century, and even Great Britain. There were periods in its liberal heights in the late 19th century where it came close. So it's come close, and when it has come close, it's done phenomenally well. So I'd argue that maybe we should just continue that experiment a little bit more and make it more consistent and do even better. The challenge is that I think the challenge was that it was not fully grounded intellectually and philosophically because the Enlightenment didn't complete its project. But that's a whole, there's a whole discussion there. Let me just say, freedom first, absolutely. Look, I grew up in a country that, when I grew up at least, was very much nation first. You grew up with the whole idea of your purpose in life was to sacrifice for the state. Every song, every story that that my generation grew up with was all about the supremacy of the state and the supremacy of the tribe above all else. I grew up in Israel, for those of you who don't know. And in Israel, in the days where I grew up, this was it. The whole purpose of growing up was to go to the army and serve. That was it. That was the whole purpose of life. And I rebelled against that. Right? I rebelled against that and left Israel partially because of that, because I wanted freedom first, not the state first. And I'm willing to fight for that freedom. I'm willing to engage in a fight for it. But it has to be for my freedom, not for some abstraction called the state that I might affiliate with, I might not affiliate with, I might love or not love. And if I love the state, if I love a state, I want to have good reason to love it. Right? I used to love the U.S. a lot more 20 years ago than I do today. I was a bigger patriot of the United States of America 20 years ago than I am today. Because its ideas changed. Its system of government is changing, sadly. And there's less to love. So love has to be earned. I don't believe in unearned love for anything. So I say freedom first. I say nation because, love your nation because it advances your freedom. And love free nations. I have enormous respect for free nations. I think, again, one of the reasons to support Ukraine is the Ukraine was moving towards freedom. It was very imperfect, but it was moving towards freedom. And Russia's not. Russia's moving towards authoritarianism and has for, really since Putin came to power. So one is the good guy and one is the bad guy. I think it's much more clear-cut from the perspective of freedom first. The freedom, and let me, one last comment, and I know you're eager to jump in. We have to define freedom because it's really crucial. If you go in front of a group of communists and you say, I love freedom, they all say, we do too. Everybody loves freedom in the world, but we don't all define the word the same way. So it's really important to define what we mean by freedom. And I define freedom as the absence of coercion against, freedom is an individual thing, and it represents the absence of coercion, the absence of force, the absence of an authority that imposes itself on you. That's what freedom is. It's the absence. It's the opportunity to live your life based on your judgment, pursuing your values. That's what freedom, to me, means. So it doesn't mean the same thing to a communist. And it means something very different to different. So when we talk about freedom, we should be careful to define our terms.
Look, just very quickly, freedom first. If you want freedom from the state, you're not going to get it if you just are focused on your own freedom as an individual. Really, the only thing you can do there is emigrate and just leave. But what would have happened, say, to Poland in the 70s and in the 80s? Those great resistance movements that wanted to secure freedom and knew that in order to do it, they needed to gather together as a nation or as groups that they believed made up the nation against state tyranny. And the reason they did that was not because they just loved the principles of freedom and decided to go off to a country that practiced freedom better, but because they loved their country so much that they hated what the Soviets were doing to it. And so that even though Poland was in a state of unfreedom in the 70s, their love for Poland is what motivated them to secure freedom for Poland. All of the examples that Yaron adduced, Britain in certain phases, the northern states in America, all of those, yes, maybe came close to the libertarian ideal. But what is true of all of them, including Switzerland? A stable, ordered nation state that was at ease with itself, that was relatively homogeneous, that was in cultural terms, ethnically and religiously, they were, in other words, ordered societies. That was what made freedom possible.
I'd argue that the United States is very much a counterexample to that. It was not ordered. It was not homogeneous.
It shared customs,
particularly not in the 19th century after you sent all your poor and oppressed minorities over to the United States. No, it's what made America America was the founding principles, and the founding principles were individual liberty. The founding document of America, the Declaration of Independence, is a declaration of individual freedom, individual liberty. It's a declaration of individual rights. It elevates those rights above everything else. And the nation is there formed not for you to serve it. The nation is there, the nation is formed in order to protect the rights of the individual, to protect the life of the individual and his ability to pursue his own values. And I think it's the first and only moral country to ever be formed, because it was formed on a moral principle, the principle of individual rights.
That founding document begins with the word "we." Not me.
Sure.
Okay, let's go to the next question.
So, unfortunately, Mr. Orr, I'm going to ask you to speak outside of British conservatism on this question, and I don't think you mind speaking internationally, Mr. Brooks. But I have a separate question for each of you. My question to you, Mr. Orr, is, so there has been a kind of successful conservative movements that have come in places in Eastern Europe. I'm thinking here of places like Hungary, of Poland, that managed to gain their freedom from totalitarianism and generated a conservative movement. But in a place like South Africa, which doesn't have the geographical convenience of the Eastern European countries, a conservatism and a national conservatism has certainly struggled to take root, because fundamentally, there is not really a South African nation. There is a group of ethnicities occupying the landmass of South Africa. And so how do you create a kind of national identity in a country that has all of the trappings necessary and all of the kind of, let's say, legislation in place to become a kind of free country and a Western liberal democracy? And then to Mr. Brooks, I have to ask, how do you take the kind of principles and ideas of freedom and individualism, and how do you fight for them in countries in which they are trampled on? What is the message that you think would be most effective, and does the kind of process to move to a society that respects individual rights, does it almost not necessarily involve the use of violence and the trampling of those rights to create the societies? Thank you.
You want to start?
Thank you. Look, I wish I had an answer or solution to give you, but I don't, and I'm not sure I even accept that South Africa in its current state has the constitutional blueprint that could enable any kind of emancipation or a sense of national belonging that could transcend the ethnic hostility that is being whipped up by the ANC, which I think at this point is nothing other than a vast criminal gang, not a government. And the very first thing that I would do is rescind the 2004 constitution, which bakes in to the infrastructure of South Africa and the economy of South Africa plainly iniquitous principles of weaponized affirmative action and so on and so forth that make the conditions of freedom, economic or otherwise, all but impossible. So that's where I would start. But I wish you weren't having to start in that place.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I think that South Africa is a mess. And partially it's a mess because it now has a lengthy tradition of ethnic segregation and thinking about everything in terms of ethnicity. That goes and skin color. That goes back to, of course, apartheid and the existence of apartheid. I was in South Africa, visited South Africa during apartheid, and it was horrific and disgusting what was going on there, and should have been condemned. But it was not replaced by anything. It was replaced by the same kind of discrimination, just in reverse, without any real solution. And look, the only solution for South Africa is individualism. The only solution of South Africa is to stop looking at people in terms of where they come from, stop looking at people in terms of the color of their skin, stop looking at people in terms of what tribe they belong to, and treat them as individuals and establish a constitution that is based on that idea of individuals. And you could do worse than looking at the American Constitution as a start for that and its Declaration of Independence. And in terms of the question you're asking me, I think the only way to move any society anywhere is through education. I don't think there's any alternative to it. It's hard work. It takes a long time. It's not easy, particularly when you're a radical and you're presenting ideas that are not popular on either left or right, it turns out. You've got to just do the hard work of talking, writing, talking, and writing. There's just no alternative. Communicate, communicate, communicate. Teach people about the values and why they should adopt yours.
1 minute.
Just very quickly, I'll add to this. It seems to me that if you are a white South African living in South Africa at the moment, that there are basically two options. One, emigrate. This is what many of them are doing now. The only other thing I have seen is the emergence of, and my gosh, how heartbreaking is this? 20 years on from, 30 years on from the collapse of the moral horrors of apartheid. White-owned, mono-ethnic, monocultural city-states, Orania, I think it's called, where effectively Afrikaners, farmers are getting together. They know that they know that they can't defeat the ANC or protect themselves exercising their individual freedoms. They know that they have to, at this point, tragic as it is, gather together against a group that is implacably opposed to them because of the color of their skin. Now, of course, that is tragic, but I note that is not. The only response that is working, short of emigrating, is forming collectives, not exercising individual freedoms that would lead you to arrest and disappearance if you raise your head above the parapet.
Okay. Just for a little housekeeping, we have 6 minutes left until lunchtime. So we're going to do one more quick question. Matthias, quick answers, and then we'll wrap it up. I'm sorry, we can't get to all the questions.
Thank you. I was going to ask you about your view on human nature, but I changed my mind because I wanted to ask a question that is closer to my heart. One of the most important freedoms for me personally is the freedom to be able to live with my family in a community that is dominated by traditional Swedish culture and identity. And you say, Mr. Brooks, that you're opposed to imposing values on others. And also you say that you're in favor of complete free movement of people throughout the globe. So the result of if your ideas were to become true, there wouldn't be any place left for me in the world to exercise my freedom, to live in a community that is dominated by traditional Swedish culture. And for this to happen, I guess you would have to cooperate with others to change the laws in Sweden so that would happen. Couldn't it be argued then that you would form a collective that would impose your values on me and take my freedom away?
No, I think that you're completely free to associate with whoever you want and to live in a community with whoever you want. It's just that how big of that community and how much of that community is imposed on other people. So you can find 100 other families and live together in a community based on your traditional values. It's when you try to impose your values on me, on others, that I object, and I think that's wrong. Just as wrong as when you're offended by people's attempt to impose their values on you. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't think there are good values and bad values. I do believe that there's good, there's right and there's wrong, and there's good and there's evil. And I think, if we're talking about immigration, which you alluded to, one of the real failures of the West is a failure to assimilate. A failure not to impose values, but to expect people to rise to the values that the West has, and certainly to impose the law, right? One of the problems in Sweden today is you have neighborhoods where you don't send policemen in, right? I mean, that's absurd and that's ridiculous. That's not living by the rule of law. That's no individualist is going to argue, yeah, they can commit crimes over there as long as they stay over there. So if there's a rule of law, apply the rule of law. But if you want to live with other people who share your values, create a community and live that way. That's great. But don't impose it on me. And as soon as you use politics to do it, as soon as you get to the issue of a government, then now you're imposing your values on other people. And that is wrong.
So can I just add, where does this crisis, the seeming inability to achieve assimilation and integration come from? Well, I would say that one of the places it comes from is a culture, as Roger Scruton put it, a culture of self-repudiation, a culture of national self-hatred, a repudiation of our statues, of our history, of our founding myths, of what makes the Swedes Swedish, what makes the Brits British. And without that kind of self-confidence in our past and who we are as a people, not as just an aggregate collection of individuals, but as a people, as a society, as a culture with a long history, a culture that can say what it means to be Swedish or British or Italian or whatever. Only there, with that kind of self-confidence, is there something to assimilate into. I don't understand on the libertarian picture, the sort of aggregate of atomized individuals just exercising their freedom. What do we need to assimilate into?
Well, here I think, again, the United States is the perfect example of this. The United States is a country with very little history that has done a better job assimilating people into it than any other country in all of human history. And it is done so on the principle of, what are they assimilating to? They're assimilating into a society that respects individual freedom, individual liberty. And that is the expectation. The expectation is to respect the rights of your neighbor. And and as long as he doesn't have his, Thomas Jefferson, kind of paraphrasing, said, as long as he doesn't have his hand in your pocket, leave him alone. He's none of your business.
Okay. We now have 1 minute left, so I'm going to take my moderator's prerogative and close this session by first thanking our very able speakers for not only articulating some of these areas in which there's a great deal of tension, but helping to pull out those things we can perhaps find we share in common, or can at least find common ground to discuss it. So I want to thank them for that. And perhaps I could identify just 3 things. Perhaps we can say that our common enemy is the French Revolution, perhaps for different reasons, or collectivism, so long as we agree that communities are not collectives as such. Perhaps we can simply agree that we are a big, noisy, opinionated, extended family who can fight one another, but when we are under attack, and I think we are under attack, we have to stand together against that. So thank you very much and enjoy your lunch.